Hi, it's Richard here from On Demand Education, with the first in a series of videos to accompany our Entities Adventures blog post series. In this first adventure, we will create a project, add entities, and study the containment relationships. For the purposes of my demo, I'm going to create a new project and I'm going to call it Workshop. I'm going to select English American as the rule language, although from time to time in this series we'll also look at creating rules in French. I will now add a Word document, ready for the rules we're going to write later. More specifically, for this video, we're going to add a properties file so that we can centralize all of our entities and attributes and other configuration elements in one file. Double-clicking the properties file shows me that there is one existing entity in this project, as in all policy automation projects, the global entity. We can think of it as a parent entity of which there will only ever be one instance. For example, if I simply wanted to model a workshop that contained cars and there was only ever one workshop, then global could play the role of the workshop. I'm going to create two new entities now. With my two new entities created, each entity has been given a single attribute, an identifier, that we'll speak about later. For the purposes of this chapter, however, we're going to study the relationships. Each entity has had one relationship created. It is called the containment relationship, and the first thing we'll have to do is modify the text associated with the containment relationship. The default text is all instances of, followed by the entity name. Notice, as according to good practice, each of my entities have been named with the inclusion of the definite article, the. However, all instances of is decidedly unfriendly. Changing the text in the containment relationship will ensure that our rules are easier to write. And I'll do the same for the mechanic. I have also added a public name for each of my relationships, as I intend to use these in a module, as we'll discover in a later chapter. Now that I have my two entities created, I'm going to turn my attention to the attribute that was created at the same time. Each entity has an identifying attribute. In the case of a mechanic, it might be their name, or it might be something else like an employee number. In the case of a car, it could be the car's number plate. In any case, all entities require an identifying attribute. Therefore, when you create an entity, OPM creates an attribute for you. You can, if you wish or need to, edit the text associated with the attribute, or indeed, for that matter, create a new attribute and use it as the identifying attribute instead. For example, an engine serial number for each vehicle in the workshop. I can then edit the entity and change the identifying attribute to the correct one. The default identifying attribute that is created is always of type text. I have now changed it to one of type number. Fundamentally, this means in the first instance that when I run the debugger without screens and I create a car and I give it an instance identifier such as a serial number, that number will be displayed in the debug window. Notice the downside of using a number is that it displays a decimal point as well. However, the car can now be labeled, for example, a Fiat, which is the original attribute created by OPM, but it is the engine serial number which is displayed in the debug window because I changed the identifying attribute of the vehicle. With these basic principles in hand, we can now continue and add further attributes to each of our entities. In the first blog article, and in this short video, we created two entities. In the article and in the video, we discussed the global entity. We looked at containment relationships and instance identifiers. If you want to follow along all the examples in all the different chapters, go to the ODE OPA blog.